Anesthetic by Mindy McGinnis. Lily sat in the waiting room, legs crossed at the ankles, trying to judge whether her thighs appeared smaller if she sat up straight. It was an insult to her education that her mind wandered to such thoughts when unoccupied, but so many such insults had been heaped upon her by fate that the self-inflicted ones slipped by unnoticed. To her right, a boy too young to care whether her thighs looked good or not criticized the art in the room. "It's trying too hard to be Manet," he said, nostrils pinched against the injustice. "Don't you mean Monet, honey?" his mother asked. "No, Mom, I don't. I mean Manet." He looked, as if embarrassed to be seen with someone that didn't know the distinction. Lily dropped her eyes and grated her thighs together, diluting her irritation at his self-satisfied tone with a discreet muscle exercise. Her soft skin chafed against the denim, the seam digging deeper into her flesh. There would be an indentation down both her legs later, a red railroad track that led nowhere more interesting than her ankles. "Oh, yes, well, you would know," the mother capitulated. The lady next to them leaned forward over the purse in her lap. "Your son is very intelligent," she said through coffee-stained teeth. "Yes, he is. He really is," the mother answered, a vague smile on her face as she looked at him, perhaps wondering how such a thing could have happened. Encouraged by the compliment, the boy smirked toward the painting. "I could do better," he announced. "Your son is an asshole," Lily thought. Instead of saying so, she switched to crossing her legs at the knees and inspected the barely there swell of her stomach. The door next to her opened, creating a wave of cold air that pushed an immaculate black curl out from behind her ear. A nurse called the boy back to the operating room. The woman who had praised him wiggled her fingers and told him to be brave. Lily tucked the loose curl back where it belonged and hoped he cowered at the sight of the needle. She looked up at the wrong moment, accidentally making eye contact with the other woman, who smiled at her. "Are you waiting for someone?" "My boyfriend is having his wisdom teeth out," Lily said, resisting the urge to tack an easy joke onto the statement. "Mine too. Well, my husband is, anyway," the lady said, smiling even more broadly, as if it were miraculous that the two of them should cross paths under those circumstances in an oral surgeon's waiting room. Her hand drifted onto the knee of the man next to her, and he made a noise in his throat. Whether in acknowledgement that he was her husband or that he was having his wisdom teeth out, Lily didn't know. He did not raise his hand from his magazine, in either case. Lily echoed his noise with a more feminine version of disinterest, and resumed studying her legs. The lacy band of her underwear was just visible above the low-cut waistline of her jeans. She had to stand to pull them over her curves, and the husband lost interest in his magazine for a fleeting second. Lily sat back down, aware that the woman's hand was now a possessive claw on her husband's knee. Getting urinary tract infections from her jeans was sometimes worth it. Lily's name was called, and she followed the nurse through a narrow hallway to the recovery rooms, studying the up and down motion of the nurse's ass as they went, self-consciously flexing her own. Her boyfriend was wearing a sheet, slumped sideways in bed, with a dribble of spit hanging from his mouth. He had been reduced to a child, 175 pounds of pure responsibility. She felt a pang of nausea and clenched her abs, willing the feeling away. "You need to keep him awake," the nurse said, tucking the corners of his hospital sheet around his toes. "Once he's communicating well, he'll be allowed to leave." Lily bit the inside of her cheek and nodded. They would be here forever. She sat calmly in a chair and hoped the nurse would wipe the drool away so she wouldn't have to, but the nurse was preoccupied with straightening the sheets and smiling at her patient. "He did such a good job," she said warmly, patting Lily's shoulder as if she should be proud of a boyfriend who could face such fierce devils as his own teeth. "You can talk to him now, to keep him awake," she said. Lily tried to look past the drool and the helplessness. What should she say to him to wake him up? That glances from strange men on the subway turned her on more than he did in their shared bed? That what she desired most these past few weeks was the sight of blood in her underwear? His eyes fluttered and he glanced at her, strung together a line of vowels, then slid back into oblivion. She reached forward and took his hand, searching for a connection, some buried scrap of sentiment for this man she was now bonded with for life. His flesh felt like wood pulp in hers, warm and unresponsive. She thought of the clump of cells inside of her, the beginnings of a body she was supposed to love with her entirety, a body too small to contain more bitter emotions, like disappointment. She clenched her boyfriend's fingers in her own, willing a resurrection of her affections. His eyes flew open. "Ow," he said. Out in the hallway, the nurse walked by, leading the over-intelligent little boy by his hands to a recovery room. His cheeks bulged with tissues, and he made grunting noises as he followed the nurse, incompetent without her. A rivulet of blood slipped from between his lips and dripped to the floor, marking their passage. Lily snuck into the hallway quietly and smeared a droplet of his blood with her boot, exposing his cells to a quicker death on the cold, sterile linoleum. When she returned to her boyfriend's bedside, his hand moved underneath her own. She let go, pulling the sheet over his palm to cover the half-moon fingernail marks she'd left behind. "How are you feeling?" He focused on her for 1 second, managed a shrug, and slipped away again. The nurse stuck her head in the door. "How's he doing?" "Pretty normal," Lily said. The nurse gave her a doubtful look. "I'll be in the next room if you need me." A second later, her voice carried through the thin walls, confident and calm. "Just keep breathing. Deep breaths. In and out." Lily obeyed, her own chest rising and falling with the nurse's intonations. Beside her, another unintelligible moan slipped from her boyfriend and she opened her eyes. "How are you feeling?" she asked again. It took some talking to convince the nurse that the mumbling and slightly confused expression was normal, but eventually they were allowed to leave. He leaned on her heavily as they stumbled through the air-conditioned waiting room, past the friendly lady and her wandering-eyed husband. The heat outside hit Lily like a wall, and she nearly collapsed under his weight, her entire body a lean muscle existing only to prop him up. He folded himself into the passenger seat like the paper doll she had played with as a child, bent in the middle too many times and unable to retain the pretext of a spine. The seatbelt was a struggle, so she clicked it into place for him, avoiding the touch of his clammy hand as she did. "I need you," he said blearily. The trapped heat inside the car brought a sheen of sweat to her skin. Her lungs pulled in the dense air, pushing it back out to poison their small space with her own carbon dioxide. The black leather of the steering wheel seared into her palms, nearly raising welts. "I know," she said. "But I can do better," she thought, as they drove away, the tiny spot of the little boy's blood on the bottom of her boot drying as the air conditioning kicked in.